So I'm going to be talking today about Brighter Shores, which is the new game from Andrew Gower, the original creator of RuneScape. Once again, I am talking about things that do not involve lifting weights or getting jacked. I am sorry about that, but this is a relatively big event for me, somebody who, to be honest, still plays quite a lot of old school RuneScape and has a huge history with this game. So, I'm going to kind of assume that you know a lot of stuff about RuneScape if you're watching this video. Obviously, if you're not somebody who knows a decent amount about it, this is probably not a good video for you. You may want to click off and watch something else. What I want to talk about today is how just insanely uncharitable I find people reviewing Brighter Shores. So the whole thing that happened is that basically RuneScape is a game that grew out of like a really old school browser MMO that was created by Andrew Gower and his brother and some other folks. And so basically it starts out as a very early version of a live services game where they really focused on, they had a really small game to start off with, but they added a lot of content over time. The game grew and grew and grew. It got a really huge following, and as a result it ended up turning into, the big game that it is today. Of course, along the way, things started to happen where basically Andrew became, maybe disillusioned with the process or maybe not quite so happy with the direction the game was going as it became a bigger thing. And so he ended up leaving the company after a while and just kind of letting it go its own way. So then, like 10 years after that, basically, okay, he's making a new game. So a lot of people speculated, okay, Brighter Shores is probably going to be like RuneScape, but, maybe more a little bit in line with Andrew Gower's vision. Maybe a little bit more in line with, maybe something like what the players want, given that the big issue that happened with RuneScape is that it went away that a lot of players didn't like. So the game was announced and it was just launched a few days ago last week, and the initial reaction was surprisingly mixed. And so there were a lot of people criticizing the game, basically saying, hey, it's like RuneScape, but it's bad. And I really want to address some of these claims because they really seem extremely uncharitable to me, like people are not really trying to give this game a real chance. So essentially Brighter Shores is similar to RuneScape. There are a lot of commonalities there. It is a very grindy RPG where, the focus is on grinding, leveling up skills in order to unlock things over time, very similar to the way that RuneScape is. It's also using tile-based movement the same way that RuneScape does. However, of course, it has a few obvious advantages. So the graphics are a lot better because it's built in a modern game engine as opposed to something from 25 years ago that was designed to run on, basically every PC in the world right from the browser. Combat is a lot smoother. Things are a lot more polished in the graphical department, and it looks really good. I like that. Obviously it's not like top of the line graphics. It's still something that runs pretty light in terms of the actual graphical demand by modern standards, but it has really good art direction, it has really good sound design, and so the end result is that it's a really solid game. Now, the thing is that there are a few design choices that people are taking huge issue with. And so one of them is basically just that there are a lot of quality of life features that are lacking that you find in games like RuneScape. So in particular, one really big point of contention for people is that the game defaults to using a one-click interaction method. So the way that it works in RuneScape is that basically you have two buttons, right? You have a left button and a right button on your mouse. So the left click defaults to doing, like whatever your most commonly used action is. And in many cases using mods, you can change that. So you can say, okay, if I left click on this person, I want it to attack them, right? Because they're an enemy. And that's what I always want to do in that situation. I don't want to have to think about it. I just want to click on that enemy and have it attack them, right? And you also have the right click, which pulls up the wider menu, okay? Maybe I don't just want to attack this guy. Maybe I want to examine him. Maybe I want to talk to him. Maybe there are other options that I can do in this situation that I would rather do. But obviously, I don't want to have to think about this all the time. So you have that left click option for when you want to do things repeatedly and quickly. And you have that right click option for when, maybe you need to do a little bit more intentional of an action that's not quite the generic action that you would normally do. The issue with Brighter Shores is that it uses a one-click format similar to RuneScape's own one-click mode, which basically just means that everything is a right click. So instead of having a left click to do a quick action, it's just always right click, and then you can select from the menu what you want to do. And that is annoying, right? Because it means that you have to then double the amount of clicks that you're doing for a lot of actions. especially when there are a lot of things where there's basically only one reason that you would want to interact with it. So having to click a menu every single time and select the interaction that you want to do is annoying. And it does feel like a step backwards, right? It feels like a really bad quality of life thing. It may not sound like very much, obviously, just one additional click, but you're talking about doubling the amount of clicks that you're doing, especially over a long period of time playing the game. And that certainly adds up. That adds up to a lot of wasted time and annoyance. Another issue that has been highlighted is that there were things like you couldn't click on the mini map to move, which is something that exists in RuneScape. There are things like the fact that there weren't really a lot of hotkeys, and the hotkeys that did exist, couldn't be changed, and seemed a little bit inconvenient the way they were set up. In particular, there's a spell that you have to use a lot, the Sense spell. Basically in the game, it's mapped to Control S, which seems really inconvenient when it's something that you want to be using a lot. You'd rather use something that you just have to push one button rather than two, right? Now, a lot of these complaints I think are very silly because Andrew Gower's already addressed this. He's already been like, yeah, I'm going to change that. And this even leads to the situation in which this video that I'm watching called RuneScape but Different and Worse, this is a video that was released day of. He'd been playing the game for a few hours that day. He complained, oh, it doesn't have this and this and this. And then literally the very next day, they made a patch that addressed one of these issues, namely the hotkeys. So they had a second day patch that added all the hotkeys that people were complaining about not having and added the ability to remap those hotkeys to any key that you wanted. So it feels really silly to do a highly critical day one review about an issue that just got patched on day two. And of course, at the same time, I have to say, I played the game for, the first few days, and I would say that they patched it probably like 5 or 6 times in the first 2 or 3 days. Like, they were genuinely patching it quite a lot from the start because they clearly knew that they had some issues to fix, and they fixed them as quickly as they could. This also included adding the ability to click on the mini map to travel, which of course was something that people were looking for that they had in RuneScape they didn't have in Brighter Shores, right? So a lot of those smaller quality of life complaints I feel are a little bit misguided, right? Like, they're going to be fixed, it's fine, whatever, don't worry about it. However, the much bigger complaint, the one that a lot of people have a lot more issue with, is basically the long-term progression of the game. So there are a few differences in Brighter Shores compared to RuneScape with the way that they handle skills. So in particular, there's one thing where basically what happens is that you keep reusing the same skilling methods over and over to level up, to grind, rather than getting specifically new methods every single time you level up. So say, for example, in RuneScape, right? Let's say that you're talking about woodcutting. You need to level up your woodcutting. To do that, you need to cut some trees. So you start off with some normal trees, and then you go with some oak trees, and then, like willow, and then, all kinds of different trees, right? That's the whole thing. You unlock different nodes, different higher tier nodes as you get stronger, until you get all the way up to redwoods at the very top, which is the hardest to chop tree, right? The way that Brighter Shores handles this is a little bit different. So the way that it works for woodcutting in Brighter Shores, for example, is that there's a certain number of trees, but they basically reuse those same few trees over and over again as you get higher. So essentially every tree has a sort of prefix and a suffix. So the prefix is like some kind of adjective and the suffix is the actual thing. So you might have, say, for example, like an oak log, but then it's like, crappy oak log, and then it's like good oak log, and then it's like exceptional oak log. This is not actually the way that these prefixes are strictly named, but it gives you a sense of how it works, right? And so the idea is that, you start off, you're doing oak, and then you do, some other stuff, and then you get to be the next tier of oak, and that actually immediately replaces the prior tier of oak. So basically, you do have to go back to the oak trees that you were chopping before to level up now as a higher level player, because, you're using these higher tier trees now. And so people complain that this gives you the sense that you're not actually progressing because you're basically just reusing older content. You're going back to the same training methods that you were before. But I actually really like this as a veteran RuneScape player because it means that I have a reason to keep going back to doing the things that I used to do when I was a lower level player. And it means that also, when you're actually playing the game, you see lower level players and higher level players intermingling in the same areas. You don't have things where it's like, okay, all the higher level players are off doing, redwoods in this area, and all the lower level players are off doing oaks in this area. No, it's like, okay, you've got players who are doing like lower tier oaks and players who are doing higher tier oaks, and they're training in the same area together. And it also gives you a very easy way as a designer from Andrew Gower's end to just continually reuse stuff as needed, which really cuts down on design time and development time, while also allowing the progression of the game to scale a lot better. So to me, this is really a huge win. Like, it feels really good, quite honestly. And I like it a lot as a player as well, because again, it feels like they can really switch you off between different training methods pretty regularly. And that keeps it kind of exciting, kind of interesting. Whereas, I know playing at the higher levels of RuneScape, it's like, okay, great. Now that I've gotten whatever level, I just need to do, grinding this specific exact one training method for a month to get to level 99. And that's it. That's not going to change at all, right? Once you unlock the higher tier training methods, you're just basically going to be doing those nonstop, with no other interruption. So I do think that this is honestly a better experience, both from the design perspective and from the player perspective. Obviously, people complain a bit that it feels like they're not really progressing because they are going back to these older training methods that they were using before. But again, I feel like that's a really silly complaint. It really doesn't feel like that personally for me. The next big complaint is that there is this really notable shift when you move from episode to episode within the game. So in particular, Brighter Shores is designed in various episodes. So there's 4 of them to start. They're making a 5th one that they've promised that's coming. I'm sure there's going to be more than that in the future, but this is kind of how it is for the time being. And each episode has a certain number of skills, like 4 or 5 skills that are basically tied to that episode. And when you complete an episode and move into a new episode, that means you unlock more skills that come along with that episode. Now, the big problem that a lot of people have is twofold. One is that because things are divided up by episodes and each episode is kind of like a zone in the game, it feels very often like there's not a lot of cross interaction between the different episodes. It feels like, okay, you've got these skills that are only applicable in episode 1 and they're not going to help you at all in episode 2, so what was the point? And likewise, also, there is a bigger issue that they are complaining about where it feels like some skills are basically just reused or basically the exact same skills again. And to a certain extent, this is true and this is intentional. So in particular, there are a foraging skill and a gathering skill, which seem functionally identical in terms of what they do. You're basically going around, picking up stuff, except that one of them is in episode 1 and one of them is in episode 2. And so it's like, okay, why did I bother, leveling up this skill in episode 1 if I'm going to have to re-level an identical skill in episode 2? And then likewise, the bigger complaint that a lot of people have is that all of the combat skills are reused. So in each episode, there is a combat skill that you need to level up in order to fight the monsters that are in that episode. So what that means is, say, I'm in level 1, I get to be a level 30 guard or whatever it's called in level 1, and then I go into level 2 and I'm basically starting over as a level 1 player again because, all the monsters now I need to fight with this different skill, which is still, functionally the exact same combat skill, but I'm starting from level 1 as opposed to starting from, level 30 or whatever I was before. And that does feel a little bit annoying. It does feel like a little bit of a setback. Obviously, people are framing it like, oh, I lose progress. You don't actually lose progress. You still have your episode 1 combat skill at level 30 or whatever. It's just that it feels like a reset when you're moving from episode to episode. Now you have to level up a new combat skill in order to, progress in that episode. And Andrew Gower has addressed this already in an update post in which he says, basically the design intent of this is that it means that, people cannot over level for content. If we make, episodes 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, for example, in the future, and, you've got people that were maybe, in episode 4, mega leveled in episode 4, that's not going to prevent, them from having a good time playing episodes, 5 and beyond. Because each time you're going to have to start training a new combat skill. And so that does make it easy from a design perspective to balance, because having a different combat skill for every episode, for every chapter, whatever you want to call them, that does really save a lot of effort in terms of needing to balance things and, ensuring that, obviously power players from earlier in the game cannot, get a huge advantage and let's just find combat super easy and breeze through the later content. But honestly, this complaint feels really silly to me. I played the game, it really didn't feel that punishing. I just enjoyed having other stuff to level up. The difference was noticeable, but it wasn't like it totally ruined my immersion or my game experience or anything like that. And I just, kept playing the game. It was fine. And a lot of people are complaining, that like, oh, the game is very grindy and there's like no point to the grinds aside from just leveling up your skills. And I just don't feel that that's true. So already a big thing that is in the game is that they have quite a few quests. And, basically those quests are, basically side quests that are separate from the main plot storyline stuff that you need to do to get from episode to episode. And so they typically have much higher requirements than really, you have to do to complete the episode and move on to the next episode anyway. So for example, clearing the first episode, basically just requires a bit of combat skill. That's about it. You don't have to have a super high level in any of your other skills. But if you want to go ahead and do the side quest, there are side quests that require really high combat skills, that require really high cooking skills, really high fishing skills. And, that's all gives you a reason to go back to that episode after you finished it to keep leveling those skills so that you can clear those quests. And likewise, they've talked in the future about how they do plan to have things that might, basically cross over the episodes a bit more. So you might have, say, for example, quests that require you to travel back and forth between the different sections and thus require you to use skills from both these different episodes. Or, for example, you might have boss fights or things like that are designed where you really have to have some of these skills leveled up in multiple episodes in order to win. So I think that people are basically just like really hung up on this, quote unquote reset here. It's really not a reset. It's really not ruining anything or like resetting your progression. People are just kind of mad that they were, in one episode and they had, X combat skill, and in the next episode they have to train a different combat skill. It feels a little bit awkward. Yes, but I think people are just mad about it for no real reason. And I want to go into, the biggest thing that I have, the biggest issue that I have with all of these complaints is that I remember very vividly what the launch of RuneScape Classic was like because I was a kid, I was a teenager at the time, and I got really into it. And I cannot be clear enough, like that game at launch kind of sucked ass. Like it really did. There really wasn't that much in RuneScape Classic when it launched, even by the standards of its time. I was made fun of because I liked the game by my peers, because everyone was like, oh, this game sucks shit with the graphics, oh, there's nothing to do in it, oh, it's just grindy, whatever. And, it was like, yeah, true. But when you look at the launch of Brighter Shores compared to the launch of original RuneScape, it's a night and day difference. And I'm not just talking about how polished it is, how good the graphics are, etc. The fact that obviously it's been 25 years since the launch of RuneScape Classic. And so, of course, you'd expect, some technological differences, right? No, I'm strictly talking about the content and the polish level of the actual skills in the game, right? So when we're talking about RuneScape Classic original launch was like 2 towns, right? It was like Varrock and Lumbridge, and that was it. Like there was nothing else. It was basically just these 2 towns and a little bit of the surrounding area around them. I don't even think El Kharid existed yet when the game launched. And, basically you could run around between these 2 towns and there were a few skilling methods that you could do and that was it. When it launched also, like a lot of the skills, they said they existed, but maybe there wasn't really any way to train them. So you're basically stuck at level 1. Some of those, fake skills were later removed. You had things like the fact that, if I remember correctly, like basically all you could do with woodcutting in RuneScape Classic was cut down normal trees. That was it. So you cut down normal trees, and then the only thing that you could do with fire making was light the logs from normal trees on fire to create a cooking fire. I'm pretty sure that was all you could do with the woodcutting and fire making skills, was literally just cut down trees and set the logs on fire so that you could have a cooking fire. And of course, there were only a handful of skills. There was like woodcutting, fire making, mining, smithing, prayer, magic, ranged. A lot of the stuff like crafting and thieving and so on, didn't really get added until much later. Many of these skills didn't really have much in the way of training methods. Prayer, for example, you could only train it by burying bones, which was a very slow training method that obviously just required that you kill stuff. And so, of course, it was, nobody had a very high prayer level. Magic didn't really work really well because they didn't have the rune crafting skill in the game, so getting runes to cast magic spells was a lot more time consuming and difficult. Likewise, basically nobody was really good at ranged because of course there wasn't really separate ranged armor or anything like that, so basically everyone was just doing melee with maybe they had a little bit of prayer on the side, Maybe they had a little bit of magic or a little bit of range so that they could, like get off a couple ranged attacks before they started, hitting somebody with melee. And that was the entire game. Like, that was all that there was to do in the game. There really wasn't that much to do in the game on launch. And really, the thing that made RuneScape so powerful, again, was that it was an early example of a live services game where they were continually doing weekly updates, adding in a ton of content, a ton of quests, a ton of things to do, a ton of new skilling methods that made the game a lot bigger over time. By comparison, Brighter Shores has like 4 specific episodes. Each of those episodes has like 4 or 5 skills. So you've already got plenty more skills, even if a lot of them are, again, potentially copycat skills or, functionally very similar to other skills. All of the skills have training methods that scale significantly better and significantly longer than anything that we had in old school RuneScape, where basically often you only had one training method and it was slow and sucked. You've got quests that already really push players to level up significantly beyond what they need to do in the basic storyline quests. The combat already has a lot more potential for interesting stuff in the future because they have things like boss fights where you have to do, specialized movement in order to avoid special attacks, which works much, much better than it does even in modern old school RuneScape. Like, yes, there are obviously ways in which Brighter Shores doesn't measure up to modern RuneScape because, again, modern RuneScape is a game that has had 25 years of development on top of that original release. But if you were to compare Brighter Shores to the release of original RuneScape, Brighter Shores kicks classic RuneScape's ass. Like, it just wipes the floor with it. There is zero comparison. This is an insanely better standard level game than classic RuneScape ever was from day one. I would say that, basically on launch right now, in terms of just the content that was released on day one, Brighter Shores has easily at least a couple hundred hours of gameplay. Now, yes, again, it's a very grindy game. That's a given. A lot of that time will be spent grinding up levels so that you can, finish higher level quests and so on, right? So yes, it is very grindy, but so is classic RuneScape. And classic RuneScape was grindy for quite literally no purpose. People are saying, oh, like Brighter Shores is grindy for no purpose. No, like quite literally, back in the day, classic RuneScape, there was just no reason to do a lot of stuff. Players just really enjoyed, like, okay, I'm going to try and level this skill up to 99, even though that's basically impossible just because. Right? Like, that was the kind of thing that we did in classic RuneScape because, there just wasn't that much else to do, but everyone loved the game. And there was this general understanding that the game would continue to improve, and it did. And it's so wild to see this launch of Brighter Shores, which, again, is an early access game. It's a day one release, and you're already, like, jumping down its throat over not having these quality of life features that, like, obviously a game that has 25 years of development has. You're jumping down its throat for not being modern RuneScape, when the reality is that, of course, it couldn't be. It's not going to be modern RuneScape. It needs to start somewhere. It needs to start off, and it is starting in a way better place than classic RuneScape ever did, personally. And I think that this is really mirrored by the fact that, basically there was a lot of backlash day one. People were like, oh, like the Steam reviews are mixed, right? And then, of course, basically a lot of those people actually just played the game a bit longer or got over that initial frustration with getting into the second section of the game and seeing their combat level, quote unquote, reset. And, people start actually playing the game and they go, actually, there's quite a lot of good stuff here and it's pretty fun. They get a little bit deeper in the game and go, okay, yeah, this is actually enjoyable. And then, of course, now the reviews have flipped. They're now mostly positive. You got a lot of people subscribing. You got a lot of people enjoying the game. You got a lot of people drowning out the haters. And, yeah, I mean, it's really wild, especially, again, from people who would describe themselves as fans of RuneScape, as fans of old school RuneScape in particular, complaining that the game is too grindy, complaining that there's not that much to do, etc., whatever. And it's like, Christ, like, where did you come from? I mean, again, I'm old. Again, I'm very old. I know that, the fact that I was there for the launch of RuneScape Classic makes me really, really old by the standards of basically anybody who's probably playing any of the RuneScape games today, right? But that's the reality of the situation. Like, I remember very, very firmly exactly how crappy of a game RuneScape Classic was when it released and how much I loved it despite that. and how because we loved it despite its flaws, it was able to grow into something big and really meaningful and really exciting. And at the same time, I look at these same kinds of people who are looking at Brighter Shores, who are, day one, just like, oh my God, it's not 100% perfect, it should die, etc. It sucks, whatever. No, it's all going to get fixed. It's all going to get improved upon. I don't know why, you're worrying that much, really. Like, have some patience, wait a bit, let them develop the game a bit more, see where it goes from there. So that is all for today's video. I hope you've enjoyed it. As always, don't hesitate to like, comment, subscribe. Let me know what you'd like to see in future videos. Smash the notification bell. Have a good week. I will talk to you all next week.